Well, now we're at the part that I'm most comfortable with, which is the message this morning. So in a moment, we'll be in Luke 22. But I want to start with a history lesson, because who doesn't love that? And history is full of moments where reaction feels like necessary. And I'm talking like urgent, justified. And these reactions happen, but they still prove disastrous. And one of the clearest examples of this is one of the things that kicked off World War I. Now, World War II is sort of the sweet spot for a lot of illustrations if you've heard a lot of preachers, but World War I doesn't quite get the same attention, probably because it happened before. That's why it's called one. But World War I really was kicked off in the summer of 1914. Europe was already really tense. There were nations that were armed. Things were wondering, like, who's going to take whose side in an argument. And then everybody just was kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, and the shoe dropped. And this was when Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was assassinated while riding in an open car. And the killing was shocking. It happened in public, and it was also humiliating for that empire. And so, as is often the case when something like that happens, it's what you would think. Fear surges, anger follows quickly, and then the leaders feel pressured to respond immediately. So here's what happened. The Austria-Hungary Empire immediately issued an ultimatum to Serbia that was so severe it was almost impossible to escape or to accept. So Serbia tried to negotiate, and that didn't work. Russia reacted to protect Serbia. Germany reacted to protect the Austria-Hungary Empire. France reacted to Germany. Britain reacted to Belgium. It's like a domino effect. And within weeks, there were millions of men from different countries all mobilized and going to war, and most of them didn't even really have a full understanding of what they were fighting for or how long it would last. Trains carried troops to the front lines in the assumption that most of these troops would be home by Christmas. Now, keep in mind, this happened in the summer of 1914. They thought that they'd be home by Christmas. And instead, they entered what is known as trench warfare, followed by years of mud, disease, gas attacks, and mass death. By the time the dust settled from World War I, more than 16 million people had been killed. Entire generations were lost. Borders for different countries were redrawn. Trauma lingered for decades. And historians have repeatedly pointed out something that we can all learn from, and it's this. There was really no one single decision that caused the catastrophe. It was the speed of the reactions that made this war unavoidable. Nobody slowed down. Nobody hit pause. So reaction triggered reaction, which triggered reaction until the damage was irreversible. And so it's important to learn that reaction always multiplies the outcome, sometimes damage. The same pattern shows up in our relationships. It feels like a smaller stage, but it can be a sharp word that's spoken too quickly, or a text that's fired off without thinking about it, or a defensive response that escalates a moment that could have been healed. And so most relational destruction isn't fueled by hatred, it's just fueled by urgency, and a lot of times without wisdom. Which brings us to one of the most intense moments in the life of Jesus. So hopefully by now you've made your way to Luke 22. What's happening here is he's about to get arrested. Everything's happening at once. Tell me if this sounds familiar. Fear is spiking. Betrayal is unfolding in real time. Loyalty is confused, and adrenaline is flooding every single piece of this moment. The disciples are all exhausted and overwhelmed, and they're surrounded by armed soldiers. And we're going to step into this in verse 47. It says, even as Jesus said this, well, what was Jesus saying? We'll get to that in a little bit. Even as Jesus said this, a crowd approached, led by Judas, one of the 12 disciples. Judas walked over to Jesus to greet him with a kiss. But Jesus said, Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss? And when the other disciples saw what was about to happen, they exclaimed, Lord, should we fight? We brought the swords. So, okay, they're asking questions. That's fair. And one of them struck at the high priest's slave, slashing off his right ear. But Jesus said, no more of this. And then he touched the man's ear and healed him. And then Jesus spoke to the leading priests and the captains of the temple guard and the elders who had come for him. And he said, am I some dangerous revolutionary that you come at me with swords and clubs to arrest me? Why didn't you arrest me in the temple? I was there every day. But this is your moment, the time when the power of darkness reigns. Notice this. In this moment, at least, the greatest danger wasn't the soldiers. It was an unguarded reaction. Peter does what felt right in the moment. He acts fast. He swings a sword. And then Jesus does something that would have been so radically different in any moment. And this is where we should pause for a moment and just be collectively grateful. Why? Because if God responded to us in the way that we often respond to one another, none of us would still be standing, let alone in this church service online today. I'm so grateful that Scripture shows us a God who's not driven by impulse, who's not ruled by his emotion, and he's never caught off guard when humans fail. So instead of reacting, God responds with patience and faithfulness. The book of Galatians says that when the time was just right, he sent his son to step onto the scene. And so Jesus wasn't sent here because God was frustrated. God wasn't panicked. He didn't say, oh man, they're finally going too far. Jesus, go. I had to break glass and release the Son of God down there. It was literally the right time. That patience that God has is the reason that redemption is even possible. God slowed the story down when sin tried to speed it up, and he chose a response over a reaction. He chose mercy over his own impulsive decision, and he chose to honor the covenant that he had made instead of getting emotional and retaliating. What we see in Jesus, especially in moments like this, in the garden, is the heart of God on full display. So the God that we worship is not only revealing his character to us, but he's also calling us to reflect it to one another. This is the Christian life. When we fail to mirror that patience in our marriages or our friendships, the damage can multiply quickly. And conversations can escalate instead of healing. Assumptions replace understanding, and words spoken too fast create wounds that take longer to repair than they did to create. Peter loved Jesus. Nobody doubts this. There's no question about it. But his reaction came from loyalty, fear, exhaustion, and adrenaline all colliding at the same moment. But love without restraint still caused harm. A man lost an ear. Chaos occurred. Jesus had to step in and repair what the reaction had damaged. And aren't you glad that he still steps in and repairs damage? So this morning is not pretending that we don't feel strong emotions or face intense moments. It's about learning to respond like Jesus when everything inside of us wants to react. And we're going to talk about that in a couple of ways. The first one is to prepare your heart. You can stay in Luke 22 because we're still going to be there, but the first one is to prepare your heart. One of the most overlooked truths in a healthy relationship is that we rarely rise to the occasion. Well, what do I mean by that? Instead, we just simply default to whatever condition our heart is already in. So if you get home from a long day, you run into your husband or your wife, and it's a troubling or chaotic moment, we rarely say, I see what's happening here. Slow down, let's take a breath. Normally, it's like, oh, you've had a day, I've had a day. We normally just pull from whatever is right inside of there. When emotions spike, when fear or frustration enters the conversation, we don't suddenly become wiser or calmer or more loving by default. Have you ever noticed that? So we just simply reveal what we've been cultivating all along. And this is why Scripture places such a strong emphasis on prayer, not as an emergency response, although seriously, it's always good to go to God when it's an emergency. But it is a daily rhythm. I said this, a few weeks ago, but Jesus made this whole concept really clear back in his ministry when the disciples were unable to cast out a demon from a boy. And they were confused because they had seen this power before. They had taken part in it. They had set people free from demonic oppression before. And all of a sudden, they were powerless. And Jesus explained it to them that some things only come out by fasting and prayer. That statement is a reminder that authority flows from intimacy with the Father, which, by the way, takes time. You have to spend time with the Father to grow the intimacy. So your readiness for these moments flows from a reliance on God that's been cultivated over time. Now, hopefully, whatever the relational problems you deal with your spouse don't involve a demon. However, if they do, see us after church and Jared will do counseling for you. At the same time, prayer and fasting, they help form who we are because we've gone through it before there was an emergency. If you spend a normal amount of time every day just in prayer and in a rhythm of that, it can help you a great deal when a crisis comes up. If you don't, and you run to prayer afterwards, I'm not saying you won't get help from the Lord, but you won't be prepared in the same way. And the reality is this, let me just take this home to our relationships before we return to the Garden of Gethsemane with Jesus. Many of the conflicts that we face are not the result of one single bad moment. They are the result of long seasons where we have not tended to our inner life. When we neglect prayer or rest or humility or self-awareness, we leave ourselves vulnerable to reacting instead of responding. And when the moment finally comes, we have no energy, we have no clarity for the situation and no patience to draw from. And this brings us right back to where we were, except this time in Luke 22, let's start in verse 39. It says here, "Then accompanied by the disciples, Jesus left the upstairs room and went as usual to the Mount of Olives. And there he told them, 'Pray that you will not give in to temptation.'" What do you think the temptation was? I've rarely heard that part addressed. What was the temptation? The temptation is to lean into whatever feels comfortable. Verse 41, he walked away about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and he prayed, "Father, if you're willing, please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." Now, another part that doesn't get enough attention. Verse 43 says, "An angel from heaven appeared and strengthened him. He prayed more fervently, and he was in such agony of spirit that his sweat fell to the ground like great drops of blood. And at last he stood up again and returned to the disciples, only to find them asleep, exhausted from grief. "Why are you sleeping?" he asked them. "Get up and pray so that you will not give in," there it is again, "to temptation." See, Jesus prepared his heart before the moment of pressure arrived. He prayed, he surrendered his heart, he faced the weight of what was coming in the presence of the Father. And the scripture that we just read says that an angel came down and ministered to him and strengthened him. He was doing what he asked the disciples to do. And after they had walked with him for 3 years, participated in his miracles, after he had sent them out several times to go and do their own ministry as a representative, he now said, "I'm going over here to pray. You keep watch and pray as well, so that you won't give in to temptation." And Jesus didn't give in to temptation, but he was prayed up something different, wasn't he? So, on the other hand, the disciples, including Peter, slept through the moment that was designed to strengthen them. I wonder how different the story could have been for them in that moment if they would have stayed up, prayed, and been strengthened. But they missed the opportunity to prepare. And so when pressure came, they had no internal readiness to draw from. When the chaos unfolded just moments after that, Peter had no tools left except reaction. And we know by default he's a hothead. He had not prayed through any of his fear. He had not surrendered any of his expectations, and he had no room built into his soul for when things go wrong, so all he could do was swing. Too often, the same thing happens in our relationships. Marital conflicts explode a lot of times, not because the moment was too big, but because the heart was already depleted. Work took it out of you. The kids took it out of you. Maybe your in-laws were there, or your parents called. Life has a way of just taking it out of you. And so when patience isn't cultivated ahead of time, we react sharply because we're not prepared. Preparing your heart means choosing to rely on God before the moment asks something of you. That way, when the moment asks something of you, you've got choices instead of one reaction. One of the most haunting examples of failed preparation in history is in the sinking of the Titanic. Now, in general, I don't have to explain what happened, but in case you don't know, it's a big boat, it sank. So the Titanic set sail in 1912, and it was not just another ship. It was considered the height of human engineering. It was massive, it was luxurious, and it was advanced, and it was widely believed to be unsinkable. It was something where people thought, if I'm on this boat, I'll be safe because they told me that it's unsinkable. But they say a lot of things, don't they? But let me ask you, why did so many people die? Any answers from my two people in the room? Hypothermia? Any guesses there? Bingo. There weren't enough lifeboats. It wasn't because the boat hit an iceberg, although that was unhelpful to survival. It was the failed preparations. The ship carried far fewer lifeboats than it needed. Not because the space was limited, they had room for it, but because they were just seen as unnecessary. Not only that, if you look into the history and the story of this, a lot of the lifeboats launched before they were even fully equipped with enough people in it. Safety drills were not emphasized. Warnings about the icebergs were received, but they weren't considered urgent. And so the ship continued at full speed through dangerous waters because slowing down felt excessive and almost paranoid. We're not going to slow down the Titanic. I bet it even went through ice in different areas and it was fine. But they couldn't tell how big this iceberg was. And when the iceberg was finally spotted, the problem wasn't that the crew reacted poorly. They reacted exactly how you would react at the moment that you discovered an iceberg. But the problem was that there had been no meaningful preparation beforehand. And so when disaster struck, there was no time to install more lifeboats. You couldn't hit pause and bring more lifeboats or have these people go through safety regulations or training anymore. The only thing that remained in that moment was reacting, and reacting came far too late to prevent the tragedy. Now, honestly, most of us, when we talk about the Titanic, we think about Jack and Rose and Jack and the heart of the ocean and other things. But on this Titanic ship, I want you to know, were 2,224 people. Only 710 of them survived, which means over 1,500 of them died. Let me put this another way. About 32% of the people on this boat survived, and about 68% died. Over 1,500 people lost their lives because we just assumed that it was safe and that the ice wasn't going to do anything to the unsinkable Titanic. And that mindset, it's far more familiar to us than we would like to admit. In our marriages and our friendships, a lot of times we live with the same assumption. We believe that because things are mostly good, that nothing really terrible has happened. Because love exists, preparation isn't urgent. And so we stop praying together. We stop tending to our inner life, and we stop slowing down to examine our hearts. We assume that we'll deal with problems if and when they show up. Nothing that bad could ever happen, right? That's when the iceberg always comes. A conflict shows up, exhaustion sets in, emotions collide, and when that moment finally comes, we discover that we don't have the patience or the capability that we thought we would. And it's not because we don't care, just like Peter. It's because we were never prepared for the moment that was going to require something deeper of us. Preparation, by the way, does not mean expecting disaster. You don't need to try to live like Batman and build up a utility belt. Well, just in case all of this happens, I've got an answer, and I've dabbled in that life before. You can't be prepared for everything, but it means you're just not going to be defined by a constant fear of what could happen. So we all have to acknowledge that love needs maintenance long before it needs repair. Preparing your heart starts with recognizing that your inner life will eventually be what shapes your outer responses. So whatever's going on the inside is always what's going to come out. And Scripture's pretty clear that what captures our attention over time forms your instincts in moments of pressure. Listen to this simple but powerful and revealing prayer from Psalm 119:37. The psalmist says, "Turn my eyes from worthless things and give me life through your word." Now, give me life through your word, excellent. Listen to the front half of that. Turn my eyes from worthless things. Can't we just turn our own eyes from worthless things? Or worthless things about people. Sure, we can do it. We've got the fruit of the Spirit. Self-control is the last one. It's everybody's favorite fruit of the Spirit. Of course, we can turn our eyes from worthless things. But there's two problems. Number one, sometimes we just really don't want to, and that self-control works against us. But the other thing is sometimes we don't realize what we're looking at is worthless. Don't look at your spouse right now. The psalmist here understands that if his attention is scattered, his heart is going to follow. He understands he may be focusing on things that God doesn't want him to focus on. So he says, God, turn my eyes from it. And so just a couple of things, just two things really. For a lot of us, preparation really starts with just tending to our own spiritual life before we ask our relationships to carry a weight that they were never meant to carry. So if you're married, let me speak to you just individually to begin with. Yes, work on your marriage. Yes, read marriage books. Yes, pray for one another. But if you're not prayed up, if you're not pursuing the Lord individually, eventually you're asking your relationship to carry the weight of you as well. You have to have your relationship with the Lord. If you're not married, hey, get a head start on this now, okay? Know who you are in the Lord before you ever step into a covenant where you become one flesh, okay? Prayer, time in the Scripture, time in God's presence, they're not luxuries for the calmer seasons of our lives. They are what we do day in, day out, winter, summer, whatever the time is. You need to be in the Lord's presence. And the other thing that I would share with you when it comes to this is that preparing your heart also means we have to recognize that maintenance is required for healthy relationships. It's just like physical health requires constant care, and relational health is sustained through regular attention. If you go to the doctor and the doctor says, hey, I think you need to work out some more, you don't go and work out Saturday and Sunday, return to the doctor on Monday and say, I worked out. How am I doing? He's like, well, I'll let you know over time. It's the same thing relationally. But here's the problem. Relationally, we can't always see the problems. We can feel them. But if you don't work on making sure that it is maintained and healthy, someday you'll get to a place where you realize it's going to take me a long time to try to rebuild it. And so the prayer in this psalm, it just reminds me that preparation is often about subtraction as much as it is addition. Sometimes when something goes wrong in our marriages, our relationships, friendships, we'll say, oh, I'm so sorry. Hey, here's a gift. Oh, I'm so sorry. Here's this. Hey, now I'm paying attention. But the reality is sometimes you also have to subtract. You're not going to win somebody over just by doing more. Sometimes you have to turn your eyes from the worthless things and prepare your heart. Don't be distracted. Don't become exhausted by the things of the life. And then you won't fall asleep in a moment that you're supposed to be prayed up and equipped. When we don't prepare our hearts, I just want you to know you shouldn't be surprised when pressure exposes your lack of readiness. When our focus is on the things of God and healthy rhythms, you always create wisdom, spaces for wisdom and your own self-restraint to grow. And I do want to say this too. Preparing your heart does not guarantee that conflict will never come, because spoiler alert, it's going to. But it will prepare you to meet it with a life that is still fueled by love, that you can remain constant and at peace, even when it hurts. The second thing that we talk about is not just preparing your heart. That's something you have to do in advance. If you haven't been doing it, today's a great day to start. You're snowed in anyway. What else are you going to do? Prepare your heart. But when those moments come, you have to guard your response. One of my pet peeves, oh man, and I've had so many people that have said this before, so I'm so sorry in advance. It's when somebody says, well, I just tell it like it is, or whatever. Okay, do you have to all the time? There are times to tell it like it is, and there are times to just be quiet and hear and think and listen. We're going to return to the same moment, but we're going to go to a different book. Okay, so we're going to go to Matthew 26, and we're going to look at it from a different angle. But before, let me just say this. Earlier, we focused on what Peter failed to do when the pressure arrived. So now we need to pay attention to what happens inside of the pressure itself. Even when the preparation had been neglected, there's still a choice to be made in the moment. We just have a lesser chance of being able to make a good choice. But that choice is whether we'll react instinctively or respond intentionally. Our instincts are not always intentional. I know my good friend Scott Wagner here in this church. I have another good friend, Aaron Rosa, who always said, I'm going to get a hug out of Scott. And he came up from behind Scott one day for a hug, and I saw Scott almost hit Aaron, because his instincts kicked in. But also, Scott, I'm not going to try and force a hug out of you because I think intentionally you might get me as well. The scene that's happening here in the garden, as we've already read, it is still chaotic. Judas has arrived. Everything inside of Peter is screaming that something must be done immediately. Have you ever felt like this? Think about this. There were already 2 disciples that said, hey, Jesus, we brought the swords. Should we fight? Well, Jesus doesn't even answer them. So here's Peter, who I got to imagine is like, you're asking him questions? Don't you think that we should already do it? We brought swords. And so he's probably thinking, why hasn't anyone else done something? By the way, I also don't think Peter was aiming for the ear. So he's probably aiming for something more deadly. But listen to what Matthew says in chapter 26, verse 47. Even as Jesus said this, Judas, one of the 12 disciples, arrived with a crowd of men armed with swords and clubs. Lines up. They had been sent by the leading priests and elders of the people. The traitor, Judas, had given him a prearranged signal. He said, you'll know which one to arrest when I greet him with a kiss. So Judas came straight to Jesus. Greetings, Rabbi, he exclaimed, and gave him the kiss. Jesus said, my friend, go ahead and do what you have come for. Then the others grabbed Jesus and arrested him. But one of the men with Jesus pulled out his sword and struck the high priest's slave, slashing off his ear. All of this is basically what we've already heard, except in verse 52, Jesus says, put away your sword. Those who use the sword will die by the sword. How is that normally paraphrased today? If you live by the sword, you die by the sword. So then Jesus says, don't you realize I could ask my Father for 1,000 angels to protect us and he would send them instantly? But if I did, how would the scriptures be fulfilled that describe what must happen now? Jesus, now to be fair, Jesus is God, so he can see this better than us, but Jesus knew that there was still purpose in this moment that was not pleasurable for people. And he also gave Peter some really great advice there. Jesus tells Peter that those who live by the sword will die by the sword. And that statement, just so you know, reaches way beyond physical violence. Jesus is actually laying out a principle for Peter to live by. Whatever we rely on as our primary response eventually becomes the pattern that shapes our lives. If you live by the sword will define you. If you live by force, force will follow you. If you live by aggression, aggression will eventually return to you. So guess what? The same thing is true in our relationships. If you live by pushing people away, you'll eventually find yourself isolated. If you live by defensiveness, you will slowly erode trust with others. If you live by sarcasm, never mind, we'll skip that one. If you live by sarcasm, contempt will grow where closeness once existed. And if you live by silence, distance will replace intimacy. I could go on for a while with this, but I think the point is that these responses all form relational patterns, and those patterns eventually form outcomes for us. So Jesus stops Peter, not only because the action is wrong, it was, but because the trajectory that he was heading down was destructive. Jesus refuses to let reaction set the tone for what comes next, so he pauses the moment, he heals the damage, and he reminds Peter that love can't be built on the same tools that also destroy it. And this is why guarding our response matters a lot much more than we would care to admit. Pausing's not really meant to be avoidant, by the way, but it is still refusing to let impulses determine your direction. So if you're somebody who says, I can't respond in this moment because it's not going to be good, that's okay. But a guarded response only creates space for wisdom to speak. You still have to return to the moment. What I'm getting at is this: guarding your response doesn't mean indefinitely delaying responsibility in the conversation. There's always going to be that subtle temptation, especially for people that are very thoughtful or emotionally aware, to hide behind phrases like, I don't know, or I'm processing. Those are healthy responses when they are used honestly and temporarily. They do give us space to calm our emotions and think clearly and avoid reacting impulsively. But maybe you need to hear today that they're never meant to become a permanent shelter to live in. Guarding your response is not the same as delaying problem solving. Processing is not the same as avoiding. Pausing is meant to lead to somewhere. And at some point, love requires movement and communication and intentional effort. So, healthy relationships are built when we move beyond reactions without getting stuck in hesitation. It's when we take time to think and pray and reflect, and we eventually re-engage with a lot of humility towards one another and also courage. It's going to take that too. We have to learn to speak with gentleness and pursue reconciliation and do the hard work of repairing connection. But Jesus didn't just stop Peter and then walk away from the moment. He stopped the reaction so that healing and Peter's purpose could continue. Guarding your response works the same way. It interrupts something that's destructive so that restoration has room to happen. So to narrow this in a little bit, in marriages and friendships and families, guarding your response means choosing not to escalate, but it also means choosing not to disengage. That's a really hard balance sometimes. And I know it means refusing to swing swords with our words while still committing to the slow and faithful work of building something. And that sounds exhausting, but it's a good exhausting. So reaction can feel powerful in the moment, but we just all need to remember that it can leave lasting damage. And a guarded response can feel slower and less satisfying at first. I watched too much TV growing up. And so I always wanted to have these moments in a big fight where somebody would say something and they'd slam the door and they'd walk away. And I used to test it out on my mom as a teenager. It didn't ever work out great. And she also never let me slam the door and walk away. Somehow she always got a last word in there. TV lied to us. I want you to know that it can feel satisfying in your mind, but when you realize the damage that it does, it's not so satisfying. So Jesus shows us that strength is not really found in how quickly we can strike in a conversation, but how wisely we can respond. Since we're going through a relationship series, I thought it would be good to have a different couple up here. So Sarah and Aaron, would y'all come up here? And we'll just do something with a different couple every week. And I'm looking forward to this. Sarah, Aaron, do you guys have a microphone? Yes. All right, great. How many years have you been married?
1.
1? And how many months?
3.
1 and 3. All right, so you guys are old at this. You should be good. All right, so here's your challenge. Before I give these to you, let me go ahead and set my clock. You're going to have 15 seconds to have a conversation. But it's not your own conversation. I wrote it out for you. Don't worry. So you don't have to think of it all on your own. There we go. I've got it set for 15 seconds. And I've got a sheet for each of you. I didn't give it to them in advance because you can't rehearse a conversation before you have it.
My autism says otherwise.
Your autism does. You can rehearse your side of the conversation, but not how it's going to go. So they're going to read this in real time, but you have 15 seconds to read this whole conversation, front and back. Here's one for you. Here is one for you. All right? We're going to start it now. Oh, wait. Who's spouse 1? Who's spouse 2?
1.
1, 2. Okay. Ready? Go.
Hey, can I ask you something
About what?
about earlier?
What about it?
You seemed kind of distant.
I wasn't trying to be.
Well, it felt that way to me.
Okay, I didn't realize.
So did I do something wrong?
No, not wrong.
Then what was it?
I just need a minute to process
Process what?
everything
Oh.
that was.
Oh, sorry, you're out of time. This is not a good sound for me. It makes me feel like I have to get up from a nap. Anyway, how did that sound to you? Out now in the congregation, I'll choose you. How did that sound to you?
Not good.
Not good? Why? Do you have some words to describe it?
It was rushed and they weren't really listening to each other.
They were rushed, not listening to each other, just trying to get their things out. So now, I just want you to read it like you would if this was a conversation. Okay? You don't have a time limit, and nobody's watching you. Okay. Go ahead.
Hey, can I ask you about something?
What?
About earlier.
What about earlier?
Well, you seemed kind of distant.
I wasn't trying to be.
Well, it felt that way to me.
Oh, I didn't realize.
So did I do something wrong?
No, not wrong.
Then what was it?
I just needed a minute to process.
Yeah, actually, this is boring because this is so healthy and normal. Thank you guys for helping me with this today. It's boring because it's healthy and normal, but guys, it's healthy and normal. But, and this happens for people who think a lot, people that are really like in tune with relationships that cycle on it. A lot of times we're busy thinking about the things that we want to say, or we're busy thinking about what they're about to say because, buddy, if they say what I think they're about to say, I'm about to get them. And these are traps that we set for ourselves, unfortunately. One of the best things that Cassie and I ever did, if you've been to this church for a while, you've heard this, but we made an agreement a long time ago that we wouldn't yell at each other. Now, we did this as a trauma response because we both came from relationships where we yelled at each other a whole lot. And I'm not pushing it on our exes. I wasn't witnessing a lot of Cassie's former relationship, but I know that they both did yelling, and I know for sure I did a lot of yelling in the relationship that I was in before Cassie. And we were tired of it, and we were exhausted of it, so we agreed that we wouldn't. An unintentional thing that was beautiful that came from this is it slowed down our pace. Normally, a conversation that is going to become heated, it starts at one level and one space and one tempo, and then as volume increases, a lot of times, the speed in which we speak also increases. And when this happens, now we're not listening to solve, we're listening to win. The anger and the volume is something that sometimes is used to make people just shut the other one down. And that may feel like a win in the moment, but it's not a win in the long run. And so that's one of the trophies we have. We'll be married for almost 16 years. In May, it'll be 16 years, and we've still never yelled at each other out of anger. Sometimes we've done things to be funny, but we've never yelled at each other out of anger. And to be honest with you, I'm scared to do it now because every so often somebody asks me. But here's a couple of things you can do if you need to learn how to guard your response. Maybe you're like, look, I am prayed up, but sometimes I still fly off the handle. Here are some things you can do. The first thing is that guarding your response begins with accepting that you always have more time than your emotions tell you that you have. Urgency is one of the greatest liars in a relationship. In fact, even in staff meetings, church meetings that we have here, I don't even know who started it all these years ago, but when somebody has something to say while someone else is talking, they just do this. Sometimes I've seen two people look like they're like a cross between a Vulcan, like from Star Trek and West Side Tupac. They have so many crossed fingers, but they have thoughts that they don't want to forget about, but they also don't want to blurt out and interrupt somebody. A lot of times it feels urgent. Just be patient. This sense of urgency that we have, it convinces us that something has to be said immediately or that silence equates to weakness, but it doesn't. And secondly, one of the most important steps in guarding your response is learning to pause before you speak. I'm not good at this. 1 out of 10. I won't say 0 because I'm alive and I'm sure I've done it, but 1 out of 10 for me. It doesn't mean suppressing the truth or avoiding a hard conversation. It just means giving yourself enough space to ensure that what comes out of your mouth doesn't have to be followed with, well, what I meant to say, that came out wrong. Just give yourself a minute. We just talked about this. Pause, but return to it. Another key step that is really important in this is learning to name what you're feeling without letting it control you. It is okay to sometimes say, hey, look, I'm not sure how to say this, but right now I'm really feeling, I don't know, fill in the blank. I'm feeling scared. I'm feeling alone. I'm feeling really angry, and I don't quite know why. I've even had conversations where I've said, I'm feeling angry and I feel like I shouldn't, but I am. So let me just get the ugly out. And it's important to have those. But just know this, in case you're somebody who says, I'm just too emotional, I'm too much. No, you are not too much. You are who God created you to be. Strong emotions are not your enemy, but unfiltered emotions are. So saying I feel overwhelmed or I need a moment to gather my thoughts is actually an act of love if you're committed to solving whatever the problem is. Just make sure that you acknowledge them without letting them sit in the driver's seat. And the last thing that I would really say about this is that your tone and your body language matter just as much as your content. The volume of what you say and the timing in how you say something can either invite understanding into your conversation or it can provoke severe defensiveness. A guarded response considers not only what needs to be said, but also how and when it will be best received. And think about this, okay? Hear me on this. Love is not just concerned with being heard, it's concerned with being helpful. Scripture points to this in Proverbs 29:11. Fools vent their anger, but the wise quietly hold it back. So out of all the times that I have heard people try to manipulate Scripture and say, well, anger is a sin. No. Wrath is a sin. Anger is not. It says, in your anger, do not sin. Right here it says, fools vent their anger, but the wise quietly hold it back. So the wise have anger? You would think that the wisest people we know are never angry. Of course they are. They just don't air it all the time. And so that verse doesn't say that the wise don't feel anger or for you not to feel anger. It just says don't give it full control. And wisdom, by the way, is not the absence of emotion. In case you're on the other side of it, you're not the big emotion, I'm too much person. Maybe you're the one that's like, that's why I never react emotionally. No. That is not the answer either. You have to have the ability to steward your emotion in a way that protects what matters most. And by the way, the people you love need to hear your emotions sometimes. When we guard our responses, we always reflect the heart of Jesus from his moment in the garden. He didn't deny how intense that moment was. You ever think about how Jesus felt right there? He's in the middle of getting arrested. He's just been sweating blood. He needed an angel to descend and strengthen him. And all of a sudden now he has to minister to Peter and to Malchus, the high priest's slave. He has to heal this person's ear and teach one last lesson while he's being dragged away by the temple guards. He's got a lot on his plate. It's not fair that he now has to deal with Peter's hot head and a bleeding ear. But he still slowed things down and he stopped the damage and he made room for healing, physical and emotional. In our marriages, in our friendships, and in our relationships, guarding our response is one of the most loving choices that we can make because it allows your truth to be spoken without destruction and it gives love the space that it needs to do its work. Everything that we've talked about in this pre-recorded message, it comes down to one central truth. The health of our relationships is always tied to the condition of our hearts. Always. What we allow to shape us and grow us internally will eventually show up on the outside in the way that we speak, the way that we listen, the way that we forgive, and the way that we respond. And the last scripture that I'll leave you with today is this. Proverbs 4:23 from the book of wisdom. It says, guard your heart above all else. Now, in churches, you hear this a lot. Guard your heart, guard your heart. And normally this is used to youth group teenagers saying, oh, I know he seems cute, guard your heart. But what's the rest of the scripture? Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. And so that verse is not only about personal holiness, it's about relational direction. You have to guard your heart because the things that you attach to are going to dictate your direction. And it's going to show you the course of your marriage, of your friendships, of your family dynamics, and your closest relationships are being set every day by what you allow into your heart and how carefully you protect it. So just to kind of recap what we talked about, preparing your heart means tending to your inner life before the pressure comes. You've got to have something in there that is ready to react when the moment comes. And guarding your response means choosing restraint and wisdom when that pressure finally does come, because it will. And remember this, that both of them are acts of love, and they both push us to slow down enough for God to grow us before we negatively influence something else. So this week I have a relational challenge for everybody. It's simple, but it's not easy. Pay attention to your heart. Notice what fills it and notice what drains it. And be honest when you're feeling impatient or resentful or when exhaustion is influencing how you respond, especially to the people that you care about the most. The challenge is for you to choose to create a space where love can lead instead of your reaction taking control. For couples in specific, if you're married or maybe dating, this might mean having a conversation that isn't about solving a problem, but about reconnecting. It may be that maybe you're in a relationship or a marriage where you look at each other and you're like, we haven't done anything in a long time. We haven't had a good reconnection in a long time. This is a sad truth about a lot of church culture. A lot of times you'll run into people that have been married for 30, 40, 50 years sometimes. And they'll say, yeah, the last 20 years haven't been so good, but it's all right. We were settled into a good arrangement. We understand, where we both sit at this point. There's so much more in a relationship than that. So maybe, even if it's been a long time, maybe it means praying together again. For families, it might look like slowing down the pace of life so that you actually have time to do something with your kids or your extended family, or to just be present for one another. And for friendships, it could mean reaching out or clearing the air, choosing grace where assumptions have been growing. We're all about grace this year. But healthy relationships rarely fall apart all at once. They drift when care is neglected, both care of what's on the inside of us and on the outside. And so in the same way, they're renewed through intentional, consistent attention. Freshening up your relationships will not require a dramatic moment, but it is going to require both a guarded heart and a prepared heart, and it's going to have to be intentional. Next week, we're going to talk about another habit that often will damage a relationship when it's left unchecked, and we're going to talk about what happens when we start keeping score with one another. So for the competitive people, I really feel like God is saying you need to be here next week. I don't want to be that guy. But you should probably be here next week. When the past wounds start getting tallied up and love starts to become transactional instead of generous for one another, that's what happens when we start keeping score, and we're going to talk about that. And as we end today, I just want you to carry this with you. Guard your heart. Prepare it carefully. Protect your responses wisely. The people that you love the most will feel the difference when you do that, and the course of your life and your relationships will reflect the love that you were meant to live out if we commit to this. Hey, look, we're going to be doing Night of Worship in just a few days, this midweek service at 7 o'clock. I hope we'll see you here for Night of Worship. Stay safe, and if you need anything, reach out to us, Liberty. We love you, and hopefully we'll get to see you in person soon.